I have to admit, I wasn't supposed to be here this morning. I was supposed to have been in Washington. My mom's memorial service was yesterday, and I had a guest speaker lined up for today. And then obviously with all that's gone on, obviously I made the decision not to go to Washington. It was the right decision, given all the travel that has taken place, and I know that physically I could not handle it, and also for the sake of our children, we needed to get back into a normal routine. And so I'm here. And it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I'm really burned out. Physically, I'm exhausted. And I thought, well, I'll still have the guest speakers still come and speak. But when he found out that I was no longer going to Washington, he made other plans. So, on Thursday, I found out, okay, I'm speaking today. And that's all right. And as I share this morning, it's just, it's where we're at. And I'm not going to claim some originality to this message in one sense, because it first came up at our coaching cluster. So Kevin, you're going to know where I'm going. And why did you know that a couple of weeks after our coaching cluster, the church that we attended last Sunday, he preached on the same passage. I'm like, okay, I'm hearing this a couple of times, and it's things that we were already doing as a family, because we've been able to see how God has been working in bringing things together. And so I'm like, all right, we're going to share from this passage because I think it's timely and it's just kind of where we're at. How many of you have ever been on a trip? All right, let's stop for a moment. What's the longest trip you've ever taken? Whether by car, plane, or boat? Hawaii. That's a long trip. Never done that. Anyone else? Huh? Ooh. Yes. Okay. Africa. Some of you have taken some very long trips. Much longer than what I've endured over the last few weeks. I calculated it out, and I've got over 10,000 miles of traveling in the last 3 weeks. And that pales in comparison to others. I heard another individual this morning who's been around the world because of their service to our country, as they've served in the military. And, going to Africa or the Philippines. Whenever you're on those trips, though, you're going, am I ever going to get there? And you're just going, when is it going to stop? Sometimes we feel like that in our journey in life. We know that God is bringing us to various points and places in our lives, but we're going, God, when are we finally going to get to fill in the blank? Maybe it's a promise from God that you've been looking forward to seeing fulfilled and completed in your life. Or maybe we look at Philippians 1:8 and we hear God's promise that says, he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Or we're like, okay, God, you began a new work in me. Man, I'd really like to see that completed now. The road to transformation seems like an air trip to Africa, the Philippines. When am I going to get there? Come on, God, please. But he's calling us to trust him. He's calling us to remember his faithfulness. Because sometimes when we're on those journeys, sometimes it can be easy to just go, I give up, right? Let's just turn around and go back. The Israelites were like that. as they left Egypt. They reached a point in their journey, they heard about the promise of the promised land and what that land was to be like. But they reached a point in the journey where it was like, are we ever going to get there? You know what? I want to go back. You know, that slavery thing, it wasn't so bad after all. I mean, that's what they said. They said, we want to go back to Egypt. Keith Green even wrote a song about it. Some of you are going, who's Keith Green?
That's just trick.
Huh?
That's trick.
Keith Green. He was a Christian musician from back in the 70s. Sadly, his life ended too soon in a plane crash. But he wrote a song. So you want to go back to Egypt where it's safe and secure? Eating leeks and onions by the Nile. Oh, that breath, it'll make you smile. You know, banana burgers, banana souffle. But yeah, you're kind of poking fun at that. But that's where they were. And sometimes we feel that way as well. And for 40 years, they wandered. It was a trip that should only have taken a few months to take. Granted, you know, there's 1 million people making this journey. But still, it shouldn't have taken that long. But for 40 years, there was another song that was written, take another lap around Mount Sinai till you learn your lesson. You know, and that's kind of what was happening. And as we follow their journey, we end up in the book of Joshua because now they're there. They're ready to go into the land. But there's one final hurdle in the process. They've got to cross the River Jordan. Now, at any other time of year, looking at the River Jordan wouldn't seem so daunting of a task. You would look at it and go, well, it's not much deeper than some of the creeks around here. And you'd think, okay, walk across. But as they came to the River Jordan on this time, it's at flood stage. We've seen a lot of rain lately in the last week and a half. And we've seen the creeks raise up out of their creek beds and swollen rivers and everything. Someone posted a picture a week ago with the water that was going over Scobie Dam. We would go, I wouldn't be crossing right now. It's a bit much. And that's the Jordan River at this time. It's at flood stage, so it's at depths of 3 to 12 feet. And you know when there's fast-moving water, what do they say, you know? Don't drown, turn around. But here's the Israelites. And God is saying, you've got to get over there. Rivers flowing. There's debris. There's probably brush in the water and everything. Would have been easy for some to have said, let's turn around. Let's go back. But if you look at Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, I want to invite you to turn in your Bibles to Joshua. We're going to read that verse from chapter 3, and then we're going to look at chapter 4. And chapter 4 is really where we're going to spend the rest of our time. Right towards the very front of the Bible, Joshua chapter 3. The 6th book of the Bible. Joshua chapter 3, verse 5. So they're right there, they're camped before the River Jordan, and here's God's message to Joshua, and what Joshua then turns and tells the people of Israel. And he says this, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Get ready, because God's going to show up. Get ready, because God is going to demonstrate for you His power. I've mentioned this a few times in the last month about being ready for God to do and to show Himself to you. But one of the steps was taking time to sanctify, to cleanse ourselves, to take a moment and go, all right, maybe there's some things that I need to take care of in my life. But here's this reminder to Israel and to us that God wants to show up, and He's going to show up. We need to do our part in being ready and preparing ourselves for that. But here, Joshua's telling the nation of Israel, be ready. Because God is going to show up tomorrow. He's going to do something big for you. He's going to do wonders among you. If you read the rest of chapter 3, you read the instruction that the ark of the Lord, those who were carrying it, all of a sudden, they had to step out into the river Jordan. The waters hadn't receded yet. So here are the priests, and they're carrying the ark. They've got their poles, and they have to take that initial step. They have to step into the water. And it wasn't until all of the priests were in the water that all of a sudden, the water backed up. And they were given the instruction, they were told, you are to wait until the ark gets it out into the middle of the river before you start to cross over. It needed to be 3,000 feet ahead of you, because the way you're going, you do not know. So this wasn't just, okay, as soon as it starts to stop up, you can just walk over. You needed to wait. So the ark goes out, gets out into the middle of the riverbed, and it says that they stood on dry ground. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've been in muddy conditions after a lot of water, I mean, what happens when you step into that mud? And if you've got carts and horses and wagons or whatever, or if you're driving, what happens? You tend to get stuck. But the Bible tells us they were on dry ground. God backed up that river and dried the ground so they could walk across. They didn't get stuck. Because again, here's 1 million people that need to get across. This wasn't like the parting of the Red Sea. This was a stopping of the river. It backed up, and they could all cross over on dry ground. But before they did, again, there's this wondering of, are we ever going to get there? And sometimes we feel like that in our lives. We're starting to grow weary. And Paul reminds us in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 13, he says, do not grow weary in doing good. Do not grow weary. And I'm going to take that out another step and say, do not grow weary in the journey that God has you on. The Israelites, for 40 years, that's a long time. And sometimes we feel like the journey we're on is taking too long, and here's Paul telling us, do not grow weary. Here's Joshua telling us, be ready. For the Lord's going to do wonders among you. He's going to do wonders in your life. So God parts the water. And when because the ark went first, it was that reminder, because what did the ark symbolize? The presence of God, the power of God. It was to be a reminder to the Israelites that God did this. You didn't. You had no power. You had no ability in and of yourself to be able to make this happen. So as the ark went out, they got to see the visible display of the power of God in their lives. And they could look back and go, This is what God did. We had nothing to do with this. Because then we read Joshua chapter 4. And I'm not going to read all 24 verses. That'll take too long. But as we read chapter 4, we see this instruction. In verse 4 it says, "And Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed over the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever." They were instructed to take these stones, and if you've ever been down by the river, it's natural to pick up some stones, and maybe you take some and you throw in, or maybe you are like us, and maybe you take some stones and you collect them. We've got a whole bunch of river rock outside our back door. But you look at the river rock we've got, and they were just small. But Joshua was saying, these stones, they're going to be sizable. You're going to be picking them up, and you're going to be putting them on your shoulder. Why? Because it was to stand as a visible reminder. Now, we can tell by reading through chapter 4 that they actually picked up 24 stones. Because they put together 2 stacks of rock. The first stack was set up there right in the middle of the riverbed. And perhaps there was something about the riverbed that where they would set it, that even after the waters receded, you would still be able to see this pile of stones. Because it says, you're supposed to be able to look back and see this marker. The second set of stones, they set up in Gilgal. That's the place, after they crossed the river, that's where they set up camp before they went on to Jericho. And they had these 2 piles of stones. Why did God give that instruction to them? Because we are forgetful people. I am a forgetful person. The older I get, the more I realize I have some-timers. And that some-timers is becoming more-timers. And if I'm not careful, and please understand, I'm not being disrespectful of any disease. I've seen the ravages of Alzheimer's and dementia. So please know I'm not making light or making fun of that. Some-timers becomes more-timers, and more-timers can sometimes become Alzheimer's. My mind is mush. It's especially mush because of what's going on right now. I was like, boom. That's why I have my brain here. This isn't my brain, this is. This is where I put all the reminders. I have my calendar. If somebody wants to meet with me, I've got to put it in here, and then I put reminders. And depending on what it is, I might set reminders a week out, 3 days before, a day before, an hour, 30 minutes, and 10 minutes before. I give myself lots of reminders. Why? Because I'm forgetful. And our tendency at times is to forget what God has done in our lives. We might look at our lives and we might go, well, we never saw things like what God did for the nation of Israel. If I had been there, I wouldn't have forgotten. Let's read Numbers 22. Or the book of Numbers, where as they're about to go into the promised land, they had forgotten all that God had already done. That's why they had to wander around for 40 years. And even after they got into the promised land, the Battle of Jericho, they still forgot. They so quickly left God. Our human tendency is that we forget. And God is saying, take these stones because you need to remember You need to remember what I have done for you. Not only do you need to remember what I've done for you, you need to be able to share what I have done for you with those around you, with your children. You see, the memorial wasn't just for our own benefit, it was for our descendants. It is that reminder that here was a fresh miracle for them. And so we are to set up these legacy stones. Why? Because God wants to demonstrate His power to us if we will consecrate ourselves. So as you look at your life and you start to remember God's faithfulness, how will you remember God's faithfulness? What are your legacy stones that you have set up so you can remember this is where God showed up? Now, if you can read this, and if you can, it says In-N-Out Burger, California. This is part of our legacy stones for this trip. It's not about eating a burger, as good as it was. It's remembering that God showed up and demonstrated His power in making this trip possible for us. It was one of the first prayers after Heidi had left. And we had talked about this before she left. The kids are going, we want to go out to California too. I want to see Grandpa. Aaron going, I've never met Grandpa. I want to see him. We're going to say, all right, we need to pray that God will provide. Because it wasn't going to happen on our own accord. And so while we were out there, and we're driving back from my sister's place, and we got to talk about how God showed up. We got to say, God did this. There is no possible way that humanly we could have contrived this thing happening. And in the manner in which it happened. And God impressed it on other people to make this happen. But we get to give God the glory and the praise for that happening. Because see, when God shows up, it's not about our own benefit. God showed up to the nation of Israel on that day, and He parted the waters, and they went across on dry ground. But it wasn't for their benefit. It was so that they could be a benefit to others. If you look at verse 24, it says, back up to verse 23, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which He dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. When God shows up, when God demonstrates His power and His faithfulness to us, it's not for our own benefit to go, all right, well, that was nice, thank you, God. It's so that we can be a testimony to God's faithfulness. We get to tell others about what God has done. This is where God showed up. This is where God demonstrated His power in my life. And we get to point people to God.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
And as we were driving in the car, that was the conversation. And we're weeping in gratitude for what God has done. And someone proclaimed, you know, those that made this happen, they didn't have to do it, but they did. Because God impressed it upon people, whether they realized that it was God doing it or not, matters not. We know God did it. And so we took time on our trip to remember this is what God did. And so we all have in and out shirts. And it's my prayer that as we look back at these shirts, we get to see the faithfulness of God. And we get to remember how God met us and showed up. And then we get to tell others about how God did this, how God provided. Because you see, we're all passing on a legacy. Whether we realize it or not, young people, you are already developing your own legacy. We were reminded this past week within the Alliance community of how brief sometimes that legacy is. As a missionary family, the Adams were home on their home assignment. Their 21-year-old daughter, who was a college student, tragically fell asleep at the wheel and lost her life. So young people, your legacy is already well in development. What legacy are you setting forth? Is it a legacy where God and His hand is clearly woven into your story? If I had time, and maybe this will be for another time, I would take out a whiteboard and I've drawn out my story before. But it's been several years since I've done it. Now my story would have some more to it. Whenever I draw out my story, I'm not an artist, so don't think that. When I draw the United States, and I can point to various locations in my journeys, beginning back in high school, 1986, Fort Collins, Colorado, Colorado State University, Life 86, where God was speaking to me, drawing me into a deeper relationship with Him, a relationship of trusting Him for guidance for my life. I didn't know in 1986 that meant that I was going to be a pastor. Something that I've now been for 25 years. We got married on September 4th, and then I think somewhere right around October 4th, October 8th, somewhere in there, I began my first ministry at a church in Portland, Oregon. And for 25 years, and I can point to our travels, I can see here where God has done this, God has done that. So is your legacy, is it a legacy where you see the hand of God and God is a part of that legacy? Or is the legacy one that is more about the agenda and the worries of this world? As we are passing on a legacy, what is it? I would trust that we are developing our own legacy stones that show the awesome and faithful God in your life. Because we need to focus on triumph and faithfulness rather than our own failures. We have that tendency. What do we sometimes do? Sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right? And sometimes the enemy is also our adversary, as he wants to remind us of our failures. Israel failed. They had messed up bad. Sometimes we might look at our own lives and we go, how can I ever be redeemed from this? Look at the nation of Israel. God has never left the nation of Israel. And even on this path that they took, on this day, Joshua chapter 4, as they crossed the river. God was redeeming them. He didn't abandon them. He didn't destroy them and start all over. But it was God's plan to redeem them. And it's God's plan to redeem you and me. So don't remember the failures. Remember the triumphs. Remember God's faithfulness and goodness to you. And if you haven't done so, take the time to look back in your life and begin to see, here's where God showed up. Create markers. If you need to make some physical things, do it. If you need to write it down, do it. Put it on a calendar, put it in a journal, share it in some way. Remember what he has done. And impart it to our children, to your children. If you don't have children, impart it to other people's children. Impart it to your neighbors, to your co-workers. Why? Because Joshua 23 and 24 says, all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty. Bear with me here. I just want to pull up some verses. Psalm 77:12 says, I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Psalm 9:1 says, I will give thanks to you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonderful deeds. Psalm 33 verses 8 and 9, let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. But there throughout is that call to remember. Today, as we come to the communion table, Paul reminds us that it is a time to remember. Perhaps the single greatest legacy stone that we have is the cross. The greatest display of God's power and his faithfulness. The greatest reminder that we will be redeemed. That God does make us right. That God does forgive and cleanse. And he makes whole. He sets free. He delivers. He heals. He pardons, cleanses, renews, restores.